Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, we're going to talk about three different things. We're going to talk about this upcoming General Conference, October 2023 General Conference. I have this spreadsheet where I've kept track of primarily the Saturday evening sessions because that has changed over the years. And this is a spreadsheet that I put together a while ago, but I've expanded it today greatly. So we're going to look at this, and there's a lot of interesting things to look at here because I took it all the way back to 1971. We're also going to talk about President Nelson's birthday, which is coming up pretty soon. He's going to be turning 99. And then we're going to revisit this idea of the blue supermoon that just took place and how I think, if it's a sign, what that sign could be. And then it might have to do with the way that the Jews view the Hebrew calendar and the months of the year and how they assign each month of the year to a tribe of Israel. And in some years, there are 13 months on the Hebrew calendar because theirs is a lunar calendar. And so they have to have leap years where they add an entire month. So believe me, it's going to be interesting. So first, what I want to do, let's talk about President Nelson turning 99. So that's coming up on the 9th of September. So that's kind of a lot of nines right there because you have the 9th and then September is the 9th month of the year. He's turning 99. Not saying that that means anything. It's just interesting. So he's going to be turning 99. And what's interesting about that is, well, it's going to put him within 1 year of turning 100. And we've talked about the significance of 100, like turning 100 in the Millennium. So, in case you didn't know, in the Millennium, everyone that remains will be in a quickened state. There's not going to be any more death as we know it now. You will die, but it's going to be in the twinkling of an eye. You'll pass from your mortal, quickened state to an immortal, resurrected state in the twinkling of an eye. And the age at which that's supposed to happen is 100 years old. So this is based on Isaiah 65 verses 20 to 22. There shall be no more thence an infant of days, nor an old man that hath not filled his days. For the child shall die 100 years old. But the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. So of course that'd be referring to people because it's still mortality in the Millennium. We haven't made it to the celestial kingdom yet. We're still going to be in mortality. So those that end up not obtaining exaltation, that continue in their terrestrial ways or whatever, that's what this would be talking about here. But everyone will live to 100 years old. And they shall build houses and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. They shall not build and another inhabit. So I'm guessing that's talking about like renting out property. They shall not plant and another eat. For as the days of a tree are the days of my people for as the days of a tree are the days of my people, and mine elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. Okay. Essentially talks about this in D&C 101 verses 29 to 31. I'm not going to read that. And then just to further back it up, we have a couple statements from Joseph Fielding Smith and also Bruce R. McConkie. I'm just going to read President Joseph Fielding Smith's statement because it's short and it's to the point. This is from Doctrines of Salvation, Volume 1, page 54. In that day there will be no death until men are old. Children will not die, but will live to the age of a tree. Isaiah says this is 100 years. When the time comes for men to die, they will be changed in the twinkling of an eye, and there will be no graves. Okay? So we've talked about a number of times on the channel already. Wouldn't it be interesting if President Nelson is the president of the church that leads us into the Millennium, and he is among the very first people to experience that changing in the twinkling of an eye? So that's why it's interesting. So just in a few days here, he's going to be 99. We've also made note of the fact that let's go back to when you were before you were 1 years old. Okay, so say that you're born in April. Okay, you're born. You're not yet 1 years old, but everything that you're experiencing that year, you're experiencing for the first time. So maybe you're born before Easter, and so you experience Easter the first time before you turn 1 years old. Your first Easter, Halloween, Christmas, whatever, and then you turn 1 year old, and then you're experiencing everything for the second time. Your second Easter, second Halloween, second whatever. So President Nelson has kind of made mention of this fact in a recent, well, it was this year in a I think it was this year. It was either last year or this year, but in a social media post, he talked about how that Christmas was actually his 99th Christmas, even though right now he's 98 years old. So I don't know if that's any sort of hint that, when he turns 99, he's going to be experiencing everything for the 100th time. And I don't know. I don't know if that at all relates to him turning 99. I don't know if like you get translated exactly when you on your birthday, your 100th birthday. I'm not sure if that's how it is, or maybe it's just in that last year. You know, it is your 100th year of life. Again, when you're first born, before you turn one, that is your first year of life. Once you're 1 years old, then that is your second year of life. So, for all intents and purposes, he's entering his 100th year of life, and maybe the twinkling, the going from mortality to resurrected, maybe it doesn't happen exactly on your birthday. Maybe it happens in your 100th year, which would be when you're 99 years old. I don't know. I don't know. Now, there's some strangeness going on right now. This has made a lot of news, and you may think that this is silly. Okay, and it is funny, but I don't think it's silly because I think this really could be potentially a sign for some people. So you had Bob Parker. For a long time, he was the host of the TV show The Price is Right here in the United States. It was a very, very popular TV show. It was like a daytime game show. All everyone that's my age has had the experience that, if you stayed home sick from school, you'd have like the chicken, like the cream of chicken or chicken noodle soup, sitting on the couch or in bed, watching daytime TV, and almost certainly you watched The Price is Right. At least I've had that experience, but let me know in the comments below if that was you. But anyway, he just recently passed away, and that's not funny. I'm not laughing at his death, but he was 99 years old when he passed away. He was 99 years old. And it's really interesting because once this happened, immediately people went to, making memes and stuff like that. And they made mention of the fact that there was a really famous game on the show called the Showcase Showdown. Okay. Where you had this big wheel. And this is what the wheel looks like. You see that? You see how there's like the big 100? That's actually supposed to represent $1. And this is the way the game goes. The Showcase Showdown is a special game where three contestants who have won their way up on the stage compete for the right to play in in the Price is Right showcase. Contestants spin a big wheel to determine how close they must come to $1 without going over. So you spin the wheel, you want to get as close to 100 or exactly at, not 100, as close to $1 or exactly at $1. And I guess basically if you get to $1, then you're definitely going on to the next round. Or if you don't get to $1, then if you're the closest to $1. So for example, you have like 90 cents right here. And it looks like they're in increments of 5. Now, I didn't watch this enough to know if there was like a 95 on there or not. But anyway, you want to try and spin it so you're the closest to $1 without going over. Here's another picture of it with Bob, at the $1 mark right there. And so people are like, "Oh, he played it right. He got to 99 years old. He didn't go over $1." But what's interesting about that is, and you may think this is silly, but I do not, because if a message is relayed, no matter the delivery method, whether it's through this, whether it's through a particular natural disaster, whether it's whatever, what matters is that the message comes through. Okay, it doesn't matter how silly it is. And we've already taken note, for example, of President Nelson's age being 99, and how the way that this year started off, and it really began last year with his 98th birthday, is that you had all these people passing away around his same age, but him surviving them all. And not just any people, like really prominent people. People that you could say are iconic of their country or religion or sport or whatever. So, for example, the whole thing that started this off was when Queen Elizabeth II died at the age of 96, the day before his 98th birthday, when he became the oldest prophet or apostle of this dispensation. So she was the longest reigning British monarch and the second longest reigning sovereign worldwide, only behind French King Louis XIV. So someone that was very well liked, very famous, very powerful. She makes it to 96, passes away the day before the prophet becomes the oldest living prophet or apostle of this dispensation. Very odd timing. But before her, just a month before, a few days before, really, like a week or two, Mikhail Gorbachev dies at the age of 91, the longest living leader of the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union was around, it was one of the two superpowers. Okay. Shinzo Abe, assassinated at the age of 67, Japan's longest serving prime minister. That was in July. Later, after President Nelson's birthday, you had, if I can find it, you have Jiang Zemin, who passed away at the age of 96, the longest living president of China and leader of the Chinese Communist Party. I don't need to tell you the prominent role that China plays in the world right now. You had the last Hawaiian princess, Abigail Kawanakaloa, who passed away at age 96. You had Pele, the quote-unquote king of soccer. So you have all these like leaders passing away. He passed away at age 82. Now, this was really weird. In the 2,000 years, more or less, the 2,000 years of the Catholic Church, you have Pope Emeritus Benedict, who passed away at the age of 95. And he was the longest living pope of all time. Is that not weird? That when the prophet of the Lord's restored church, the true church, becomes the oldest prophet or apostle of this dispensation, the Catholic Church, which essentially took over after the Great Apostasy, its leader, the longest living leader of all time, passes away just a couple months after President Nelson's birthday. And then, I'm not going to go through all the other things, but just in general, last king of Greece, Constantine II, passed away at age 82. Lisa Marie Presley, Princess of Rock, age 54. This is this year now. And then look at this. Just a few weeks after the longest living pope of all time passes away, You have the longest living nun. Lucille Randon passes away, 118 years, 340 days old. Longest living nun of all time. And there is a website that's set up to track the longest living nuns. I did a video about this. And I think she's kind of the last of this series. We did have Jimmy Carter, the longest living U.S. president, at age 98, that entered hospice care in February. And as far as I know, he's still alive. I'm sure that's going to make big news whenever he passes away. But I've wondered about, is he going to pass away before President Nelson? Is he going to be part of this series? This series where if you look at these people not as people, but representing their countries and institutions, and how at the second coming, all of that's going to go away. There's not going to be any more nations as we know it now. Everything, all nations are going to become subdued when Christ comes. So it's all very fitting. And so we have this most recent, Tina Turner, the queen of rock and roll. So we have the princess of rock and roll, the queen of rock and roll, even though that's not actual royalty, just the fact that they have that nickname, it's interesting. So now, we have President Nelson turning 99 and entering into his 100th year of life. And then just recently we had Bob Parker, who passed away at the end of August. Just within the last few days. I don't know exactly what day. I didn't look into it that far, but it's within the last few days. Last week, 2, something like that. And not getting to, again, so silly. I know it sounds silly, but not getting to 100. Getting really close, but not getting to. Whereas if you move on into the millennium, everybody will get to 100. It's interesting. Okay, so that's it for that. I got this email from Grant Polsander about the upcoming General Conference. It seems like they just released the updates on, the sessions and stuff like that. And by the way, here's on the church's newsroom website, October 2023 General Conference has a picture of Christ meeting with people in modern clothes. So I can only assume that this is kind of like a second coming type image. But what I was interested in, as always, is, what is the Saturday evening session going to be? And are there any other interesting details about the upcoming General Conference? Well, as far as I can tell, the Saturday evening session is going to be a joint session. I don't know how long you've been a member of the church. Feel free to put it in the comments below. How long have you been a member? But it used to be that the Saturday evening session was pretty much always the priesthood session until recent years. And so, like I said, I put together this spreadsheet. I can't remember when I first put this together. This may have been a couple years ago. But I decided to take it all the way from present, all the way back as far as the church website goes. And it goes back to 1971. And I put down these different sessions according to the way that they're called on the church website. And there's things that change throughout the years. So with the exception of the joint sessions, I'm just calling them joint sessions. They have no special name on the church website. It's just the Saturday evening session when it's a joint session. So going back, April 2022, we had the women's session, and that's what it's called for that year, the women's session. And then before that, a joint session. Before that, a priesthood session. you see that they basically started like alternating. So when President Nelson became, I'm going to zoom in more. When President Nelson became president of the church, his first general conference was essentially a regular general conference where the Saturday evening session was the general priesthood session. However, in that year, there was not a general women's session as there had been the years before, which you can see from 2014 to 2017. There was always this general women's session that took place. So President Nelson becomes president of the church, and there's no general women's session that general conference, April 2018, but you still have the typical format of the Saturday evening general priesthood session. But then the next year, there is no priesthood session. Instead, the general women's session takes that slot. And then in April, it goes back to the general priesthood session. And then in October, it goes to the women's session. And then April 2020, that was that very special conference with the Hosanna shout and all the things. There was only a joint session for the Saturday evening session. And then it went back to the women's session in October 2020. And then the priesthood. And then 2021, it was a joint session. 2022, women's session. And then ever since that time, they've all been joint sessions, including, it would seem, this upcoming general conference. Now, I learned a few things that I didn't know before because I wanted to fill this out all the way. For some reason, October 2016, instead of calling it the general priesthood session, it was only called priesthood session. Whereas the 3 years before that, it was general priesthood session. And then before that, it goes back to priesthood session. And that's how it shows up every single year except for April 1990, where it was called General Priesthood Meeting. So instead of session, General Priesthood Meeting. And then you go back, priesthood session, all the way back to 1971. And you may just think that this is whoever's, inputting this information on the church website. And that could be, but I tend not to think so because it seems like everything there is pretty precise. Just that's the feel that I got from it. So I think that it actually is intentional. I don't know what difference there would be between calling it the priesthood session or general priesthood session. Maybe there's absolutely no difference, but I don't know. If you know the answer to that, put it in the comments below. But the fact of the matter is that this is how it appears on the church website. All right. Now, what you had before October 2014 is you had, so it went from general women's session, and before that, it was general women's meeting. And in that year, and I have a link for it right here, actually in this year. So you can see the reference there. I'll show it to you in just a second. So October 2014, that's when it basically switched to, well, let me just read the article. I'll just read it. It'll word it better. LDS Church confirms women's meeting now part of general conference. Okay, so before it wasn't, according to this. The LDS Church's semi-annual general women's meeting is now an official session of the faith's semi-annual general conferences. Quote, the First Presidency has decided that the General Women's Meeting will be designated as the General Women's Session of General Conference. So notice the change from meeting to session. Said Jessica Moody, spokeswoman for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Moody confirmed the decision after the new issue of the church's monthly magazine, The Ensign, referred to the meeting as the General Women's Session. LDS General Conference is usually held each year in early April and early October traditionally have 5 sessions, 3 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. The general women's meeting is held a week before on a Saturday night. The addition means each conference will now have 6 sessions. And, well, it's actually not that easy. I mean, that kind of sums it up how things had been, more or less. So, the year before it became the general women's session, it was the general women's meeting. But before that, it was actually called, and it alternated each year between the General Relief Society meeting and the General Young Women meeting. Okay. So in October, it would be the General Relief Society meeting, and in April, it would be the General Young Women meeting. So, in fact, it seems that only in the year 2014, well, it actually changes all the way back here, but for a long time, it had not been called the General Women's Meeting. It was called either the General Relief Society meeting or General Young Women meeting. So you go back, and that's pretty much how it was. You'll notice that in April 2003, they had a special satellite broadcast for children. And so when you go to the church website and you look up this general conference, it'll have the talks that were in this special satellite broadcast for children, along with all the other meetings and sessions. Okay. And this is actually really interesting because if you'll remember, we've talked a lot about the rising generation and the Lord's Youth Battalion. So, okay, think about this year. The year is 2003, okay? Now, we have this generation that attended, or these age groups that attended the Hope of Israel Worldwide Youth Devotional in 2018, put on by President Nelson and his wife Wendy, where this was the first introduction of the concept of the Lord's Youth Battalion. And we've felt, or at least I've felt, that this is a special group and probably a transition group between the before Millennium period and after Millennium period. We'll have to wait and see how it happens. But it seems like, at the very least, this is like one big push just before the second coming. I put down their age. It was ages 12 through 18. The 18-year-olds began their missions in 2018, the 17-year-olds in 2019, and so on. In this year, those that were 13 years old at the time are roughly beginning their missions right about now. And then next year will be the 12-year-olds. So you have this group. So the 18-year-olds in 2018 would have been born in the year 2000. So this was in 2003. So the 18-year-olds would have only been 3 years old. I don't know the age groups for the children, if it included nursery, but this probably wouldn't have been directed so much at the Lord's Youth Battalion group, but essentially the group before them. Okay. But if we look at my phrase tracker, and we look at the phrase rising generation, you may recall that this phrase really picked up in 2006. And if you're new, if you don't know what this spreadsheet is, it's a tally of all the general conference talks that include these words or phrases. So in the year 2006, rising generation was used in one general conference talk. So if we go back before 2006, you can see rising generation being used here and there, and it's kind of sporadic. You know, sometimes there's long stretches of time where it's not used. But then, starting in 2006 until present, it's mentioned all the time, every single year. Let me zoom out so you can see it a little bit better. You see this block of red right here? So 2003, there was that, what was it called again? Sorry, I have to remind myself. Special satellite broadcast for children. Special satellite broadcast for children. So, and then after that, that's when you have that group, including those that come after, that would be part of this rising generation that these talks seem to be referring to. So isn't that interesting? I really think that this is a thing, this particular group of youth. I mean, it would include a few different groups. It would include, in a broader sense, uh, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials. But it's like the closer we get to the second coming, I think the more intense it is. And I have a spreadsheet where we've gone over all the generational quotes. And just for that one or two people that inevitably are going to say this, let's go to my time or my quotes. Rising generation. If you're of the opinion, and it is an opinion, because I've actually put in the time to look for it. If you think that they've always said that we are the generation to see the second coming, this is nothing new. That is not the case. Okay? Yeah, it only started in 1967. If you have any additional quotes to send me, then send them my way and I'll add them to this spreadsheet. But the only time before 1967 that we ever see anything talking about a particular generation seeing the second coming, it was in 1936 in Doctrines of Salvation, where Joseph Fielding Smith says, "Some now living may see second coming." And then Joseph Smith put out his own generational statement, were I going to prophesy, I would say the end of the world will not come in 1844, 5, or 6, or in 40 years. There are those of the rising generation who shall not taste death till Christ comes. So we looked at what Bruce R. McConkie had to say about this statement, and he said that it would include all those that were then living plus their children. And so if you had, for example, I can't remember exactly how it went, but in this column right here in blue, this would be somebody that was an infant at the time that Joseph Smith said that. And remember, you had men that were in plural marriages that were having children all the way up until they died, as was the case of Joseph F. Smith, where he passed away at the age of 80 and he had a pregnant wife. So if we take that example, someone that was 80 years old and had a child, and I think Bruce R. McConkie said not only would it be their generation, but the next two with it. I can't remember how he said it. But essentially, in this example, it turns out that President Nelson is part of that group. You see President Nelson right here, 1924. So that's just another reason to believe that him and his age actually are very significant. Because according to Joseph Smith's statement and what Bruce R. McConkie said about it, he would be in that generation, which is pretty amazing. Okay, but these generational statements have not been made until 1967, and they've only increased since that time. And if you're going to say, well, they were saying that when I was young, again, I would remind you, if you're living and breathing enough to be able to say that, that means that you're alive. And it's not over till you're dead or till all the people in your generation are dead. So anyway, so that's really interesting about this special satellite broadcast for children in 2003, because it pretty well encompasses this main group of youth that they're talking about recently, the rising generation. Okay, before that, going back in time. April 1999, there was in February, but they put it like as a part of General Conference, or they on the church website. This is where you find it, is under the April 1999 General Conference. You have the February 1999 Conversion and Retention Broadcast. So that happened. Okay, now you see that the pattern of alternating between young women and Relief Society, that begins in October 1993. That's when that pattern began. It goes from October 1993 until October 2013. Now, that's interesting because that's exactly 20 years. So for 20 years, this was the pattern. The alternation between Relief Society and young women, and then you have the Saturday evening sessions that were the priesthood session, and then you have a couple special sessions and broadcasts like these two for children, and then the conversion and retention broadcast. So that pattern began 1993. Before that, the year before, it was just the priesthood session. The year before that, you had, instead of calling it the General Relief Society meeting, it was called the General Women's Meeting. The year before that, or sorry, I should say the conference before that, April 1992, there was a Relief Society sesquicentennial satellite. Oh, do I need to? Yep. Give me just a second. Let me fix that. There. Relief Society I'm having a hard time today. Relief Society sesquicentennial satellite broadcast. And then the general conference before that, General Women's Meeting. And you can see that there's that pattern where every other year there would be a General Women's Meeting. Now, in 1990, April 1990, there was, for some reason, instead of just calling it priesthood session, they called it the General Priesthood Meeting. So not session, but General Priesthood Meeting. Again, there may or may not be a reason for that. There's no way for me to really know without digging into it deeper. But I'm going to put it the way that it shows up on the church website. And in that same general conference, there was a member finances fireside. Okay, but this was, you can find this under the April 1990 General Conference. Everything here you will find in these corresponding general conferences on the church website. Go back to 1986. You have the priesthood leadership meeting. Okay. And then, so this pattern of like every other year having the general women's meeting kind of gets interrupted in 1982 and 1983. And in 1982, you have a welfare session. And as you can see in column E for miscellaneous, you start to have all these different sessions that have to do with the church welfare program. Most of them are called welfare session, but there's a few of them that are called general welfare session. And then in 1977, April, there was one called welfare services session. So those are the three: general welfare session, and then the one welfare services session. Okay. And under the women and young women column, you have the General Relief Society meeting, and then there's a women's fireside addresses. So there's been like all these different variations going on from 1982 and before. you had these welfare sessions. I'm not sure what the purpose of that would be, but they do talk about the church welfare system. Like I have this, for example. This is from October 1975. There's still much to do. Okay, so this is by President Spencer W. Kimball, and let me just read a little bit of what he says here, just so you get like a feel for it. He says, I have almost become converted to the welfare program this morning." And of course, he's joking there. There are just two or three things I wish to say. One is the great gratitude we have for those who are operating and administering the welfare program. A second thing is to say that, as President Romney has indicated, there is still much to do. Greater efficiency and more application to our basic problems. And third, I would like to say I wish our enemies could have seen this program this morning and seen the wide variety of help and assistance and succor that could be given to the people of this world. So, if you have any insights into why there was like this big focus on the church welfare system during these years, let me know. But it's interesting that they had, and these were full on sessions, just like any other session, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. You had, several speakers for each session. But yeah, between 1974 and 1982, all these sessions having to do with the church's welfare program. Why do you think that is? Do you know why that is? If you don't know, do you have a theory as to why that is? I think it's interesting that you have these different things, the church welfare stuff going on. Later in 1990, there's the member finances fireside, because I think that back in those days, people were still relatively sane when it came to finances and mortgages and loans and stuff like that. It's not like crazy like it is today, where to live in Utah, to have a decent house, like a nice, just like an average house, you have to fork over $500,000 to own one. And then everybody's getting into debt, and everybody, there's credit card debt, there's auto loans, all the different types and flavors of debt, have gone amok since this time. So maybe it's that. Maybe they were trying to help people avoid what was coming. Prophets see around corners. So maybe it had to do with that. I don't know. And then the other thing that I would point out is that from 1976 and before, you had another full day of sessions. So, so for example, you would have the regular Saturday and Sunday sessions, all 5 of them. On top of, so let's just look at the year 1976. October 1976. So you'd have the regular general conference, the 5 sessions. On top of that, there would be a 6th one that would be the welfare session. And then on top of that, you would have 2 more for a total of 8 sessions of general conference. And these additional 2 sessions, in this case, were on Friday. Now, I don't know if this was the Friday before or the Friday a week later. I'm not sure. Because in the case of April 1976, I was under the impression that Tuesday was the following Tuesday after General Conference for some reason. I can't remember what made me think that, but all of these were primarily on Friday, with a couple exceptions. There were 2 that were on Tuesday, and then in 1972, April, it was on a Thursday. So it was pretty intense back then, especially these years from 1974 to 1976, where you had the regular sessions, the welfare sessions, and the Friday sessions. That was an intense period of time right there for those couple years. All right. So these are all things that just were not on my radar. Frankly, all growing up, from my point of view, all that I ever really knew about when it came to General Conference was just the regular 5 sessions. And the way that I experienced it was that, oh, that was pretty much it. Sometimes I would hear about, you know, general women's session or general young women meeting. Um, but I just kind of like I had that like kind of off to the side because it didn't apply to me. Um, I don't really remember. I'm sure my mom did attend or watch the General Relief Society meetings, but that it just wasn't on my radar. So the way that I always thought it was, I thought it was just regular General Conference, 5 sessions, and then it was only recently that we started having uh, the change up in the priesthood session, but that's not the case. And you can see that, and this would all be according to the direction of the Lord, of course. But you can see that things have changed over the years, and at certain times they were focusing on different things, and they had special sessions, and yeah, and that's how it went. And so now, just to review the last few years, again, I would point out from 2018 all the way back to 1971, and probably before, the Saturday evening session was always the priesthood session. But then it wasn't until October 2018 that we started having the sixth or the oh my gosh the evening session of the Saturday evening session changed to something else. In this case, the general women's session. So things are changing. Um, I don't exactly know how to interpret all this. I would invite your theories or your knowledge um, to be put in the comments below. But this is a very interesting change in things. And I think it's a sign of the times. And I don't think it's because of like whatever worldly explanations you want to put to this. I could see like the Salt Lake Tribune being like, oh, well, the church now they're realizing that women need to be elevated. And so now they're having that be the Saturday evening session sometimes. And it's eventually going to get to the point where the women are ordained as bishops and priests and all that stuff. They're just moving slowly in that direction. I don't think so. And I don't think that it's appeasement to the feminists. I think that it's in some way preparing for the second coming. We have different seasons within the church, even within our own dispensation. Times when we focus on some things and then we change that focus to something else later on. And this is a pretty big change. Again, if you were to show somebody, if you were to take this spreadsheet and give it to somebody in the year, 1985, for example, and you were to show them how the future was going to go, they would probably be like, what the heck happens in 2018? What changed in that year? What's going on right here? What happened? If you didn't tell them when, because I don't have the president of the church listed here, like who the president of the church was for each of these general conferences. So I wonder what somebody from 1985 would think if they saw this, not knowing that President Nelson was began his presidency in that year. It's just really, really interesting to look at and think about. Do you remember attending any of these like special sessions? Do you remember the member finances fireside? Do you remember the Relief Society Sesc? Holy cow! sesquicentennial satellite broadcast. Do you remember that? Do you remember before the women's session became part of General Conference? Do you remember these, the alternating Young Women and Relief Society meetings? Do you remember the special satellite broadcast for children? And I'd especially like to know, do you remember these welfare sessions? I want to know more about that. Why was there such a great emphasis put on the church welfare program that it had to have its own general conference session dedicated to just that? Let me know. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to push back this video again on the full moon. This one went longer than I thought. And that's probably good. It's good to, not get all the topics and stuff all too mixed up. I do the best that I can, but I think we're gonna cut this off here. So let me know what you think. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.